Shalom, shalom, covenant family. Favor to you all, and may the perfect peace of our Master and Elohim, Yahweh Messiah, be with you all. And as we are just days away from the Pesach meal and the festival of Matzot, unleavened bread, I am sure that all of you are very excited, and so you should be, as we all find ourselves preparing to feast with our King. Today, I'm bringing a teaching called Lamb Selection, making the right choice by choosing life, as we look a little closer at the 10th of the first month. I want to highlight that we acknowledge and recognize that the 10th day of the first month is not a prescribed Sabbath-like observance or an appointed time of our Master as given to us in Vayikra 23. However, we learn some valuable lessons on the significance of this 10th day of the first month in understanding a lot of the preparation that goes into causing us to enter in to the presence of our Master and guard his appointed times, shadow picturing for us the perfect work of our Master that's given us access by his blood. So the 10th day of the first month was typically understood as Lamb Selection Day because it was on this day, the 10th of the first month, when the spotless lamb would be chosen and would be inspected for 4 days before slaughtering it for the Pesach meal. And we see in Shemot 12, verse 3 and verse 5 to 6 the following. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this new moon, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year-old male. Take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same new moon. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall slay it between the evenings. A perfect year-old lamb was to be selected from the flock of the goats, or the sheep was to be kept for 4 days. Now here we're able to see a beautiful foreshadowing of the redemptive work of Yahweh Messiah. It was during these 4 days which led up to the sacrifice of Yahweh Messiah that he too was inspected, in a sense, as he challenged and exposed the corrupt practices of the Pharisees and scribes, who earnestly sought to find fault with him, yet they could not. The sinless and perfect Lamb who takes away the sins of the world came into Jerusalem on the 10th day of the first month, went into his father's house, and he was examined and questioned for 4 days, when no one could find fault with him, as we see in the book of Lucas, chapter 23, verse 13 to 15, where it says, And Pilate, having called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people, said to them, You brought this man to me, as one who turns away the people. And look, I have examined him in your presence, and have found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him. And neither did Herodes, for I sent you back to him. And look, he has done none at all deserving death. Yahweh Messiah was a year-old lamb, came to fulfill prophecy, and we can learn valuable lessons in the work and redemptive work that our Master has brought to us by being the Word made flesh and bringing for us an entrance into covenants of promise that we once did not have access to. Now, as we consider this time of year, we often find in our walk of complete belief in Yahweh Messiah is that during this time of year, or even perhaps some weeks before Pesach and Matzot, many people often find themselves being challenged and confronted by trying circumstances, which in a way is actually vital in bringing to surface any possible sin or lawlessness or rebellion that there may be in one's life as a hindrance to walking in complete truth. Getting rid of leaven is certainly a collective theme or focus for all true followers of Yahweh Messiah, and especially as we consider this time of year, as we ensure that by the end of the 14th day that all leaven must be out of our homes, we also recognize the lesson on how this practical application on a physical level has great impact on us on a spiritual level, seeking to ensure that our lives are not cluttered with the leaven of sin and rebellion. Joel writes the following to the Corinthian assembly in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7 to 8. Therefore cleanse out the old leaven so that you are a new lump, as you are unleavened. For also Messiah, our Pesach, was slaughtered for us. So then let us celebrate the festival, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of evil and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Now with the focus of cleansing out and observing or serving without leaven, we recognize that in order to serve and worship the Father in spirit and truth, the rotten stuff, or that which causes rot, must be put out. And this we can only do when we truly have chosen to serve our Master, the Pesach Lamb, in complete sincerity and truth. And in this teaching called Lamb Selection, Making the Right Choice by Choosing Life, I want to take a closer look at this 10th day of the first month and the great lessons that we can learn from this day. Each year I send out this message, and this year I'm doing a video teaching. I think I've done it once before as a video teaching. This year I'm doing it again. And I want it to be a continual reminder of how we are to be encouraged to be a people who are continually serving in sincerity and truth, because we who have truly taken the true Lamb in a pure acceptance of his sacrifice for our lives have been cleansed, and we have been set apart to serve him, being true vessels unto value. His cleansing us and his setting us apart brings about a clear responsibility for us to keep clean and to keep set apart, making sure that we cleanse our lives from all forms of the leaven of the flesh that corrupts, and also the leaven of the Spirit that corrupts, in order to have the good leaven of the kingdom worked in us so that we can be presented as acceptable before him. The Greek word that's used here in 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7 for cleanse is ekathairo, which means to cleanse out, cleanse thoroughly, or purge. And it comes from ek, which is a preposition that denotes an origin or point from where an action proceeds, and it has the understanding of meaning from or from out of. And kathairo means to cleanse of filth and impurity and to purge. It also has the meaning to prune trees and vines from useless roots, which I find very fitting in its description. Metaphorically, it's also understood as carrying the meaning of cleansing from guilt. I find that the meanings that these words express highlight very clearly to us the clear fact that it is only by the blood of Yeshua Messiah that we are able to be cleansed from guilt and be purged from the useless roots that we were once held bondage to, in order to be grafted into the true vine and his covenants of promise by his blood. Now, this word ekathairo is also used in Shaul's letter to Timotheus in his second letter, translated as cleanses, in chapter 2, verse 21. It says, "If then anyone cleanses himself from these matters, he shall be a vessel unto value, having been set apart, of good use to the master, having been prepared for every good work." Now, Shaul outlined future challenges that Timotheus would face, challenges that I believe we too also are facing in these last days, the days of Noah, so to speak. We are living in a time where we can certainly see a superficial faith, if you want to call it that, a superficial faith confession being made by so many who are merely giving a worthless lip service while being further and further corrupted through lies and traditions and false teachings that have been handed down through generations, being taught by false teachers who have simply been teaching as they've been motivated, teaching these corrupted lies, being motivated by evil desires. Anyone who cleanses himself from the dross of sin and the dross of lawlessness and the dross of rebellion will be a set apart vessel unto value to the master and of good use to the master. Now, the Greek word for vessel comes from the root word skios, which means a vessel, an implement, goods, article, or jar. And what we see and take note of is this Greek word is also used in Shaul's letter to the believers in Thessalonica, where it says in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 3 to 7, "For this is the desire of Elohim, your set-apartness, that you should abstain from whoring, that each one of you should know how to possess his own vessel in set-apartness and respect, not in passion of lust like the nations who do not know Elohim, not to overstep and take advantage of his brother in this matter, because the master is the revenger of all such. As we indeed said to you before and earnestly warned, for Elohim did not call us to uncleanness, but in set-apartness." Now, the Greek word that's used for value in this passage that I've just read, from 2 Timothy 2, verse 21, as in the expression of a vessel unto value, the word for value comes from the root word time, which means to value or honor, a valuing, a price, an honorable use, or mark of respect. It's also used to describe the price that we were bought at in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 20, where it says, "You were bought with a price, therefore esteem Elohim in your body and in your spirit, which are of Elohim." So this time of year, as we draw closer to Pesach and Matzot, we're able to celebrate and remember how we were bought with a price, and therefore we must reflect that in our daily lives, we are valuable vessels in our Master's hand. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 7 to 10 says, "We have this treasure in earthen vessels, so that the excellence of the power might be of Elohim and not of us, being hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, being perplexed, but not in despair, being persecuted, but not forsaken, being thrown down, but not destroyed, always bearing about in the body the dying of the Master Yahushua, that the life of Yahushua might also be manifested in our body." You know, our Master has covered us with the pure silver of redemption, and he's done that through his own blood. He purchased for us a redemption that we could not buy for ourselves. Our response to his purchasing us is that we are to continually and consistently make sure that we allow his word to be that which cleanses us and that which teaches us how to flee the lusts of the flesh, doing our utmost at presenting ourselves approved to Elohim as a worker who does not need to be ashamed by rightly handling the word of truth. What I find interesting is that this Greek word for treasure in 2 Corinthians 4 verse 7 comes from the word thesauros. Thesauros means treasure, storehouse, magazine, repository, and it refers to the place in which good and precious things are collected and laid up. What we get the English word thesaurus from this, and a thesaurus in its general use is a reference work that lists words that are grouped together according to similarity of meaning, containing synonyms, and sometimes it contains antonyms as an opposite meaning. Now, the main purpose of a thesaurus and such reference works that are written for us is to help the user to find the word or words by which an idea might be most fitly and aptly expressed. So when we think about this, we've got to stop and say, do we truly see the treasure that we have been given? We've not just been given some random words, but rather we have been given the very living words of our Master that he has put in us in helping us find the proper words and actions that can be most fitly apt to every and any situation we find ourselves in. He's put his thesaurus in us, so to speak. Now we need to be reading his word. We got to meditate on his word so we know what's in us, because the word is not far from us. It's in our hearts and in our mouths to do it. His word is so powerful that it enables us to rightly divide and discern the truth so that we can behave and live as true set-apart ones in complete set-apartness and righteousness, even while we're living in the midst of a world that's getting darker and darker and darker. And as we're sojourners here, faithfully enduring, we are looking for the blessed expectation and esteemed appearance of our great Elohim and Savior, Yahushua Messiah, which we can only do when we are able to rightly divide and discern the truth. His good and established word that he has put in us in order that we may be fit for every good work as we stay in him and exercise proper reverence is something that we must continue in. However, our Master makes it clear that you cannot put your hand to the plow and look back and think that you're fit enough. Our eyes must be constantly fixed upon the Prince and Perfecter of our belief, not turning to the right nor to the left. We are to be pressing on with great endurance as fit set-apart ones of the Most High. And what we see here is the Greek words that Shaul uses in Corinthians 5 verse 8, which I read earlier, in terms of we serve with unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. What we take note of is the Greek word for sincerity is the root word eilekrineia, which means clearness, purity, and sincerity. In the fuller sense of the Greek, it can mean tested in the light of the sun, rendering one to be spotless and completely pure. And we recognize that this is as a result of the light of the word bringing to surface the impure while being tested and cleansed. In order to serve the Master in this way, that is, in true sincerity, we cannot have anything that is still hidden in the dark from him. In other words, we must listen to the word of our Master. We must make sure that the light that is in us is not darkness. The Greek word that's translated as truth is aletheia, which means truth, truly, according to the truth. Our Master tells us in Yochanan 14 verse 6 that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And to walk in the truth is to walk in him. To walk in him in whom there is no spot or blemish. To walk in him is to walk according to the truth and the impurity of the truth as we hear God and do his commands. As we carefully consider his instructions on a daily basis, meditating on his Torah day and night, we must make sure that we do not take his work of redemption and the cleansing that he has brought us lightly. In the washing away of our filth and our dirt, he's given us clear and true garments of righteousness that we must keep clean until he returns. Now, if we do find that we have muddied our garments through sin, we must immediately confess to him in order that he cleanses us from all unrighteousness, which he is trustworthy and faithful to do to all who come humbly to him and acknowledge their sin and lawlessness and rebellion. And so, as we are drawing near to this feast, the up-and-coming feast of unleavened bread, of Matzot, we also recognize how we are to examine ourselves in order to ensure that we do not eat this meal in an unworthy manner, lest we eat and drink judgment upon ourselves. Because Shaul tells us in 1 Corinthians 11, verse 26 to 29, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the death of the Master until he comes. So that whoever should eat this bread or drink this cup of the Master unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Master. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For the one who is eating and drinking unworthily eats and drinks judgment to himself, not discerning the body of the Master." So the antonym, the word of opposite meaning to the Greek word eilokrinia, for sincerity, is the word hypokrisis, which means hypocrisy, dissimulation, which dissimulation is to hide under a false appearance, or play acting or pretending. Our Master certainly condemned the actors of his day, who tried to assume an appearance of righteousness, yet when confronted with the light of the word, their pathetic act was clearly exposed. In Matthew 23, Matityahu 23, verse 25 to 28, our Master said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are filled with plunder and unrighteousness. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, so that the outside of them becomes clean too. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly indeed look well, but inside are filled with dead men's bones and all uncleanness. So you too outwardly indeed appear righteous to men, but inside you are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness." Hypocrisy and lawlessness tend to be found in the same dish. And while many people desperately try to appear to be wearing the right garments, their lawlessness or rebellion to the truth is exposed under the pure plumb line of the truth of the word of Elohim. Therefore, I once again say that the practical obedience to the command of ridding our homes of leaven must be adhered to on a physical level, as it teaches us that we are to be prepared to examine ourselves under the inspection of the light of the truth, in order to ensure that inside of our hearts is also clean and rid of any leaven. Collectively, as a body of Messiah, we are the house or dwelling place of the Most High. And if there is a little leaven in any of our lives, we are in danger of destroying the rest. Serving the Master in sincerity and truth is not a game, to be found playing without a care in the world. It's of vital conduct. In fact, it's the vital conduct that's necessary for daily living, serving him in sincerity and truth. And to highlight the seriousness of our choice that we are to make in whom we shall serve, and the implication of that choice, as we consider the 10th day of the first month, commonly understood, as I've said before, Lamb Selection Day, I briefly want to go through a passage in YAHWEH and dig into some key words as we carefully consider our words and commitments that we make with our mouths to the Master. In YAHWEH chapter 24, verse 14 to 25, just so that you guys, where am I back here? I've gone way out of line here now. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, now, just want to get to this here. Apologies for this. There we go. There we are. YAHWEH, I'm learning some new techniques in terms of bringing messages in a more constructive way in a video teaching to you. So apologies for that slight delay. I didn't want to record everything over again. So let's get into YAHWEH 24, verse 14 to 25. "And now, fear Yahweh, serve him in perfection and truth, and put away the mighty ones which your fathers served beyond the river and in Mitzrayim, and serve Yahweh. And if it seems evil in your eyes to serve Yahweh, choose for yourselves this day who you are going to serve, whether the mighty ones which your fathers served that were beyond the river, or the mighty ones of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. but I and my house, we serve Yahweh. And the people answered and said, Far be it from us to forsake Yahweh and to serve other mighty ones. For Yahweh, our Elohim, is he who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Mitzrayim from the house of bondage, who did those great signs before our eyes, and has guarded us in all the way that we went, and among all the people through whom we passed. And Yahweh drove out from before us all the people, even the Amorites who dwelt in the land. We too serve Yahweh, for he is our Elohim. Then Yehoshua said to the people, You are not able to serve Yahweh, for he is a set-apart Elohim. A jealous El is he. He does not bear with your transgression and with your sins. If you forsake Yahweh and shall serve mighty ones of a stranger, then he shall turn back and do you evil and consume you after he has been good to you. And the people said to Yehoshua, No, but we do serve Yahweh. Then Yehoshua said to the people, You are witnesses against yourselves, that you have chosen Yahweh for yourselves to serve him. And they said, Witnesses. And now, put away the mighty ones of the stranger which are in your midst, and incline your heart to Yahweh, Elohim of Israel. And the people said to Yehoshua, Yahweh our Elohim we serve, and his voice we obey. And Yehoshua made a covenant with the people that day, and laid on them a law and a right ruling in Shechem. So, this passage forms part of Yehoshua's final address to Israel, and here in this passage he challenged them to serve Yahweh without hypocrisy. By the redemptive work of the Master Yeshua Messiah, in whom we have the assurance of a promised inheritance, we are to hear these very clear words of Yehoshua given to a people who had been given what they did not labor for. Having received the cleansing of the Master, as we partake of his body and blood at the Pesach meal, we also realize that we are to work out our deliverance with fear and trembling. And in this passage, Yehoshua makes it clear on how we are to do just that. You know, in verse 14 it says, And now fear Yahweh, serve him in perfection and truth, and put away the mighty ones which your fathers served beyond the river and in Mitzrayim, and serve Yahweh. So we see very clearly here 4 key things that we are told in this verse. Fear Yahweh, serve Yahweh in perfection and truth, put away the mighty ones your fathers served, and serve Yahweh. In effect, Yehoshua was presenting them with the responsibilities of possessing the inheritance that Yahweh had given them and the effectual results of actually choosing Yahweh. So as we take a closer look at these 4 clear instructions that are being given to us through this passage that I've just read from Yehoshua 24, we can learn some wonderful lessons. Fear Yahweh. Now in the Hebrew text, the phrase that's translated, and now fear Yahweh, is written as Va'ata Yeru et Yahweh. Now the Hebrew word that's translated as now is atah, which means now or at this time. And with the conjunction of the vav at the beginning, it renders it and now, or but now. So there's emphasis on the clear call to fear now. It's very clear. The Hebrew word for fear comes from the root word yareh, which means to fear, be afraid, have reverence, respect. And in the tense that it's written in, it carries the meaning of to stand in awe, to be awed, or to show reverence, honor, and respect. You see, it's now time to fear Yahweh. It's now time to stand in awe and live reverently in total respect to our Master, the very thing that cannot be put off until another time. The call here to fear Yahweh, the call is to fear Yahweh now, in the present, wherever you are and wherever you find yourself. There's no time to delay and put aside the need to fear him, for we are to fear him now. And in this present continuous action that we understand should never stop. We do not have to look very far today to see the hypocrisy and the lawlessness of so many who actually truly lack the proper fear of Yahweh. The responsibility of possessing our inheritance begins with a reverent fear of Yahweh. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom. Now, Israel were being called to have a reverence for the Elohim of such infinite power, and were being called to fear him, so as to not offend him and forfeit his goodness, and to constantly maintain an awe of respect and honor for him, giving him esteem and giving his authority the esteem that it's supposed to be given, while maintaining a great fear of his displeasure in having a continual regard for his all-seeing eye upon us. You know, that same call to now fear Yahweh given to Israel back then has not changed for us today. It is still now fear Yahweh. I'm not always sure if most who today claim to follow Yeshua Messiah actually are fearing him or walking in the fear of him. And a lot of them actually don't fear displeasing him. We are to have such a high and devoted reverence for him that we could not even think about displeasing him in any way. So much so that the reverence of who he is and what he's done for us would cause us to continually make the right choices in line with his word. When we fail to do this, we are in fact in danger of not heeding this clear instruction to now fear Yahweh. Making the right choice of ensuring that we fear him now will cause us to be on guard against the leaven of hypocrisy and lawlessness so that we can serve him as we should. True fear of Elohim equips the believer to serve him. And Yehoshua tells us how we are to serve him. You know, we are to serve in perfection and truth. And the Hebrew root word that's translated as perfection is tamim. It means perfect, without blemish, complete, sound, blameless, without defect. It comes from the verb tamam, which means to be complete, to be finished, to be at an end. His perfect work in us calls us to be perfect in him as he is perfect. The word calls us to serve Yahweh with a perfect heart. Devarim 18:13, be perfect before Yahweh Elohim. Matthew 5 verse 48, therefore be perfect as your Father in the heavens is perfect. Now this call to be perfect is often a hard expectation if it's understood in the wrong way. But what does it really mean to be perfect or to have a perfect heart? Well, to not have a perfect heart often speaks of one who might have begun well, yet did not endure to the end. It can speak of one who does not carry on to completion that which they've been called to do. It can be a kind of doing right but kind of scenario. Let me just make it clear. There should be no buts in our committed life unto Yahweh. We shouldn't say, I know it says this, but. So when we are told to be tamim or perfect, we are told to be complete, to be mature in our thoughts and our actions, not immature children that need discipline all the time. We're to grow up. We are to move on to maturity, which comes through the perseverance of trials in order to be complete and not lacking anything, as Yaakov reminds us. It's those who are immature, those who stay on the milk of the word, who cannot walk perfect before Yahushua. The Hebrew word tamim carries with it a more expanded meaning of being mature, whole, and complete, and emphasizes to us the need to be one who is earnestly seeking to learn the truth, to abide in it, walk in it according to the Spirit, rather than being childish and chasing after feeble matters of the fleshly attractions that a very wicked and corrupt world has to offer as some kind of alternative. What becomes clear as we grow in the knowledge of our Master is that we all have a choice to make, each and every day, and that is to either be set apart and be perfect before Elohim, serve him in spirit and truth, or fall away to the ways of the world and run after the things of the flesh. Those things can never satisfy the spirit of man. The Hebraic understanding or concept of being perfect before Elohim entails one being fully committed to Elohim with their all, having their heart and mind in the right place, exercising true belief through works of righteousness, and not being double-minded and unstable. In other words, to be properly perfect before Elohim means being loyal to him while living in the midst of an unstable and wicked world that presents many corrupt alternative options, which aren't options actually for us set-apart ones. And they present these things through compromised standards that are actually abominable before the face of our Master, our mighty Elohim, Yahweh of hosts. Now, many may reckon that it's kind of impossible to be perfect in an imperfect world, and they'll try and present many arguments that they deem to be a very valid one. Yet the fact is that we either obey the word of Elohim or not. Now Elohim calls us to be perfect, and that we must be if we do want to see his face one day and live forever with him. Scripture's full of examples of those who were perfect as well as those who were not. And so we must take the lessons that we're able to learn from Scripture and make sure that we grow in the knowledge of our Master and grow in our set-apartness and be perfect before him. Being perfect before Elohim means that you will hold fast to Elohim and his word, guard to do all he's commanded us to do, despite what others are doing, despite the wickedness that we're surrounded by day in and day out. You know, David understood the importance of the Torah. In Tehillah 19, verse 7 to 11, it says, "The Torah of Yahweh is perfect, bringing back the being. The witness of Yahweh is trustworthy, making wise the simple. The orders of Yahweh are straight, rejoicing the heart. The command of Yahweh is clear, enlightening the eyes. The fear of Yahweh is clean, standing forever. The right rulings of Yahweh are true. They are righteous altogether, more desirable than gold, than much fine gold, and sweeter than honey and the honeycomb. Also, your servant is warned by them. In guarding them, there is great reward." Now, in the psalm that I've just read, the Hebrew word translated as perfect is tamim that we've been looking at. Also in Tehillah 119, verse 1, we see that the blessed are the perfect in the way, who walk in the Torah of Yahweh. So here's a clue. To walk in the Torah of Yahweh is to walk upright and be perfect. Those who cast aside the Torah and claim that it's no longer valid or of any use are basically refusing to be perfect as commanded. Because without the Torah of Elohim, how can anyone learn to walk in the perfect way and become the perfect bride that he's coming to fetch? In a psalm that expands on the importance of the Torah of Elohim, in Tehillah 119, we see in verse 80, it says, "Let my heart be perfect in your laws so that I am not put to shame." So the command is very clear, be perfect. How are you responding? Although many people ought to be teachers by now, they haven't moved on to maturity. Maturity in the word, because they continually stumble through their inability to take the responsibility of seeking, learning, and growing in the truth, as they would either wait for others to spoon-feed them continually or hold fast to and rely upon the man-made traditions that have held so many people captive on what I would call sour milk. You know, the Hebrew adjective tam, which comes from the root word tamam, can also be used to describe one who is morally and ethically pure. And the first time that we see this root word being used and translated as complete is understood very clearly for us, that the understanding in the ancient pictographic text, we see tam being pictured, which means complete, blameless, guiltless, perfect, upright, undefiled. It's pictured as follows, where you have the tav and the mem. The tav is a picture of two crossed sticks. It represents the idea of a seal, a covenant, a mark, or a sign, and it points to the complete work of Messiah and the renewal of the covenant in his blood that brings the two houses of Israel and Yehudah together as one. And he's not only the Aleph and the Tav, but he's not only the Aleph, he's the Aleph and the Tav. He's the beginning and end of all creation. Now, the letter Mem is pictured as water, or that which flows, can also represent chaos, but we also recognize the blood of our Master is what cleanses us. So when we look at these two pictographic letters that give us the idea of being complete and blameless and perfect, we then see it secured through the washing. So how do we get perfect? Secured through the washing. Our ability to be perfect before Elohim has been made possible by the blood of our Master and Elohim, Yeshua Messiah. His blood cleanses us from all sin. It's through his word that we're able to be equipped to meditate on his word day and night, that we're able to be continually washed and set apart for service unto our King. We are to serve in perfection and truth. Now, the Hebrew word for serve comes from the primitive root word avad, which means to work, to serve, to become slaves, cultivate, perform. It even has the meaning of worship, because our work is also our worship unto the Master. What we do in our daily lives is worship unto him. And it also carries the understanding of extending considerable energy and intensity in performing a task or a function. In other words, this is giving it your all. And it's from this primitive root word avad that we get the noun eved, which means servant, slave, or bondservant. Now, in the ancient pictographic script, this is avad or eved, servant or to serve, is written as follows. You've got an ayin, a beit, and a dalet. An ayin is a picture of an eye. It represents the idea of looking at, seeing, or watching, as well as knowledge, as the eye is the window of knowledge. The beit is a picture of a tent floor plan. It represents the house or tent. It represents family and the importance of those who are inside, as opposed to the physical structure itself, and it represents us as the dwelling place of Elohim. The dalet is a picture of a tent door. It represents back and forth movement. It represents access, And so we also understand that our Master is the door. He's the entrance. And when we look at this word for servant or to serve in the pictographic script, we get the meaning one who watches at the door of the house. and this is what our Master has called us to do. And when we consider that Yeshua Messiah is the door, we further see our need to be looking to him continually, guarding to do all his commands, and that we are to keep watch over his body, therefore never neglecting the gathering of the set-apart ones. Vayikra 25 verse 55 says, because the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Mitzrayim. I am your Elohim. And as a child of Israel, which we have become, just so by the way, by the blood of Yeshua Messiah, we are now servants of Yahweh, who are called and commanded to serve in perfection and truth. True service that is perfect must be done in truth, or else it's just a corrupted and empty, vain service. The Hebrew word for truth, emet, means truth, firmness, faithfulness. It's a word that carries an underlying sense of certainty and dependability. We know that the word of Yahweh is truth, as we see in a couple of verses or 3 verses from Tehillah 119, verse 142. It says, your righteousness is righteousness forever, your Torah is truth. Verse 151, you are near, O Yahweh, and all your commands are truth. Verse 160, the sum of your word is truth, and all your righteous right rulings are forever. Now anyone who claims to serve Yahweh without walking in and giving heed to follow his Torah commands and his instructions are not serving in truth. And those who claim that the Torah or law of Elohim is done away with, they sadly riddled with the leaven of the hypocrisy of man's theologies and dogmas that are actually only seeking to serve self rather than the giver of life, while they are actually falsely claiming the opposite. Now, in ancient pictographic symbols of the word for truth, we're given greater insight into understanding how Yeshua Messiah is the truth. This word emet is pictured as follows. You've got an aleph, a mem, and a tav. The aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's pictured as the head of an ox. It represents strength, muscle, and it carries a clear picture of beginning, in the beginning of our strength. The mem we've looked at, the tav we've looked at. So we've seen those 2 letters. Now, as I said, when we consider these letters describing Messiah as the truth, we're able to see that it's by his strength and his might that we are able to pass through the waters in order to secure for us a covenant of promise through his blood. Messiah is the Aleph and the Tav, the first and the last, who came from above, passing through the waters of the heavens and the earth in order to redeem us from destruction and death. So when we look at this in the ancient pictographic script, we also get the meaning strength of the washing is secured. He is the truth. His word does not return empty. His word is truth. His word leads us in truth. His word lights our way as we walk in him, by walking in his word. And we are given the assurance that our feet are set on a solid path. What I do find very powerful in this pictographic is the immense insights that we can glean from these. We know the Aleph and the Tav are the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. We also take note that the letter Mem is the 13th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, in Hebrew, we get the term Echad, which means 1, and it carries the numerical value of 13, with the Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, having a numerical value of 1, the Chet, the 8th, having a numerical value of 8, and the Dalet having a numerical value of 4. And when you add that up, you get 13. And so when we recognize that when we are immersed in the name of Yeshua Messiah, we are grafted into his body, and we walk in his word as we diligently guard to do, submitting to God to do his commands as given through his written word. Another aspect of the Aleph and Tav can also be seen in the Urim and the Tumim, which are the lights and illuminations or the perfections. There's no evidence to clearly tell us what the Urim and the Tumim consisted of, whether it was stones or some other substance. But what we do see is that the high priest would use these in order to get right ruling, so that the Urim and Tumim clearly speaks of our seeking the perfect truth from Yahweh. What is interesting and worth noting of is that the first letter of Urim is Aleph, and the first letter of Tumim is Tav. Chazon 1 verse 8 says, I am the Aleph and Tav. Beginning and end, says Yahweh, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. Yeshayahu 44 verse 6 says, thus said Yahweh, sovereign of Israel and his Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts, I am the first and I am the last. Besides me there is no Elohim. So what are the Urim and the Tumim? To put it simply, they are the things that illuminate and perfect. Yeshua is the light. He was the perfect lamb. And so this represents for us our need to hunger and thirst for righteousness and be perfect before Elohim. For he is perfect, and we're called to be salt and light, which we can only be when we seek out his right ruling and walk according to that which is to be upon our heart, his Torah. And as we notice the positioning of the Urim and Tumim behind the breastplate of the high priest, it's a picture of the word, the light and perfection of the word now being in our heart. Our Master in Elohim writes his Torah in our hearts, so it's in our hearts and our mouths that we may do it, as we're told in Devarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 30, verse 14. So when we consider this rendering of truth in the pictographic script, it clearly shows us our need to continually seek, meditate on the Torah of Elohim, so that we can be a people who are on guard against defiling our garments. You know, how can people say that the truth is in them when they say the truth is no longer applicable? When a true servant who fears Yahweh and serves in perfection and in truth, then the putting away of all falsehood that has been inherited from the past is actually done with urgency and without hesitation. You know, we are to put away the mighty ones which our fathers served. So we've looked at serving Elohim in sincerity and truth. Putting away the mighty ones that our fathers served. The Hebrew word for put away comes from the root word sur, which means to turn aside, depart from away, to avoid, to be removed, to put away. And this word sur actually implies the meaning or concept of turn away, leave, depart, and then we get the idea of come out from among them, as we see in Yeshayahu 52, making it very clear to us in verse 11. Turn aside, come out from there, touch not the unclean, come out of her midst, be clean, you who bear the vessels of Yahweh. As we acknowledge the inherited lies of our fathers, we must act in accordance with this call as true fearing servants of the Most High to turn away from and leave that which we were taught in error and come out from the leaven and corrupted teachings of man that have defiled the truth of true set apart and perfect service. 2 Corinthians 6 verse 17 says, therefore come out from among them and be separate, says Yahweh. Do not touch what is unclean, and I shall receive you. The Greek word that's translated as come out is exerchomai, which means depart, come out from, or go forth. And it's the same word that's used in Chazon 18 verse 4 when it says, and I heard another voice from the heavens saying, come out of her, my people, lest you share in her sins, and lest you receive of her plagues. Now the Greek word that's translated as separate, as in come out and be separate, is aphorizo, which means to mark off by boundaries, to ostracize, to separate, set apart. And it comes from apo, which is a preposition and primitive particle meaning from or away from or against, and horizon or horizon, which is predetermined, fixed, appointed, to mark off by boundaries. So what's made abundantly clear in Scripture is that we are called to come out and be separate. And the way we come out and be separate is that we turn away from the corrupted ways of man and we come into the perfect Torah as we serve our Master in sincerity and truth. If we don't heed this call to come out and be separate, we might just find ourselves among those that the messengers will separate from the congregation. When we see the following in Matthew 13, verse 49 to 50, it says, thus it shall be at the end of the age. The messengers shall come forth and separate the wicked out of the midst of the righteous, and shall throw them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Matthew 25 verse 30 says, and throw the worthless servant out into the outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. You know, the choice is not a difficult one to make. In fact, it's a very clear choice. Separate yourself from all foreign worship and all its associated practices, and separate yourself from all that which profanes set apartness in any way, or you will be separated for destruction and you will be thrown into outer darkness. You know, Shaul tells us to lay aside every hindrance and sin that entangles us. And when we've just read Yehoshua 24 in put away, we realize this call to put away the false mighty ones of our fathers is that we must in effect remove, reject, and abolish the lies of past falsified and abominable worship practices that have clearly rejected the need to walk in and obey the Torah. In verse 15 of Yahushua 24, that he makes it very clear, choose. He says that if it's evil in your eyes to serve Yahweh, then choose who you're going to serve, whether the truth or whether the false lies of the fathers. And when we consider this 10th of the first month, in a manner of speaking, Lamb Selection Day, we are to be reminded of the choice that we are to make. And in this verse, we can clearly understand from these words is the simple option that's clearly placed before us. After having described a covenant people who ought to fear and serve Yahweh, Yahushua then says to Israel, if this call for complete and perfect service is evil in your eyes, then make your choice as to whom you're going to serve. The opposite to evil is good. And in Hebrew, good can carry the further understanding of being functional, whereas evil could be understood in certain aspects as dysfunctional by not operating or walking according to the master's instructions. If it is then very safe to see that Yahushua here is, in a sense, making it clear to all the very following. If serving Yahweh is dysfunctional for you, then go and choose your own way. In other words, if it doesn't quite fit into your plans or your schedule, and it doesn't suit your lifestyle to throw off lawlessness and inherited traditions and lies that have been erroneously taught as an acceptable worship, then go and make your choice. But know this, that choosing the falsely inherited systems over truth will cause you to no longer be part of a covenant people of Elohim. So many people today will say they keep the Sabbath, or they keep the Sabbath, or they say keeping the Sabbath doesn't work for them. And they've made their choice. A lot of people say, no, it doesn't work for me. I've got things on. Well, that's the choice they've made. But then they must recognize that they're not a covenanted people with Yahweh. And what they must realize is with the choice, they have no right to take his covenant upon their lips and assume to be a part of the body of Yeshua Messiah. Tehillah 50 verse 16 to 17 says, but to the wrong Elohim said, what right have you to recite my laws or take my covenant in your mouth while you hated instruction and cast my words behind you? You know, Yahushua is basically saying this to Israel, a redeemed people who had received their inheritance. They were now expected to fear and serve Yahweh. And in doing so, they were to throw away all the lies and the falsehood that they had inherited from their fathers in the past and start serving in sincerity and truth. And if that didn't suit them, they had to choose whichever way they'd wanted to go. Because if they did not fear and serve as instructed, then it's very clear you cannot be part of a covenanted people of Yahweh. Yahushua then emphatically declares that he and his house serve Yahweh. What he was in effect saying to this nation, as a shadow picture of Yeshua Messiah, our head, was that the covenanted house of Elohim serves Yahweh. And if you do not want to serve, then you're not part of his house. Of course, all Israel answered and said they would serve Yahweh, like so many today who will quickly and easily have a quick response of a lip service. Just say, yes, we'll serve. Yes, we'll serve. And in verse 19, Yahushua basically tells them they're unable to serve Yahweh. He's a jealous Elohim. What he was making clear is that to serve Yahweh as a true redeemed servant should is not easy. He's set apart. He's jealous. He was challenging their confession. The question we should ask ourselves as we consider this time of year is, are we up for the task, so to speak? Because if you go back on your word, you will be consumed. Now, Shaul tells the assembly in Corinth that there can be no union between the dwelling place of Elohim and idol worship of any kind. And so, to serve Yahweh calls for true set-apartness, which is not an easy task amidst a crooked world, but yet his yoke is easy. Now, it sounds like opposites that I'm saying, but when we understand it in a mature way, it becomes so much easier for us to grasp. Yahushua warns that making the right choice, the true choice to serve Yahweh and not walk as he commands, will be detrimental to your health. And by that I mean that many say they choose Yahweh, yet they don't obey. And in the process, they don't realize that their false choice, so to speak, through a service that is only good in their own eyes, will render them as not being known by the Master, and will be cast away for their lawless works. Hebrews 10 verse 26 to 29 says, if we sin purposely after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a slaughter offering for sins, but some fearsome anticipation of judgment and a fierce fire which is about to consume the opponents. Anyone who has disregarded the Torah of Moshe dies without compassion on the witness of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment do you think shall he deserve who has trampled the Son of Elohim underfoot, counted the blood of the covenant by which he was set apart as common, and insulted the spirit of favor? Now, having understood his words, Israel still continued to say yes to serving Yahweh. He then tells them that they are witnesses against themselves. Twice they'd said yes, and by their own confession, being given twice, they had now become witnesses against themselves, for at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses a matter is established. I find that so many who are hoodwinked into a system of falsehood and lies are never taught the full truth, as they are only told the blessings in the word, which they actually have no right to lay claim to as long as they remain in a state of lawlessness. You know, the whole truth is not being taught in a false and mixed corrupt system of worship. And that's what so many people do not realize. And they don't realize the danger of choosing Yahweh and then walking in their own ways, or the ways of inherited lies from their fathers. They're at risk of facing death. The knowledge of the danger of turning aside from the truth should cause one, a true worshipper who confesses with their mouth and believes in their heart that Yeshua Messiah has died for them and has risen from the dead, should cause them to hold fast to the walking in proper reverent fear of Elohim. Hebrews 12 verse 28 to 29 says, "Therefore, receiving an unshakable reign, let us hold the favor through which we serve Elohim pleasingly with reverence and awe, for indeed our Elohim is a consuming fire." People are perishing and are heading for death. Why? For lack of knowledge. Sadly, been veiled through falsehood and inherited lies and corrupted traditions, we who've turned to the Master and have had the veil removed must take heed to the choice that we have made in serving Yahweh with our all. Yehoshua gave these very vital words to impress upon them the very weight of the responsibility that lay before them. And we too must recognize the responsibility that we have in serving and worshiping the Father in spirit and truth daily, as true worshippers amidst a very crooked, corrupt, and perverse world that has so many false mighty ones that are being served in error. In Yehoshua 24 verse 24, the people declared for a third time that they would serve Yahweh and obey his voice. This was a third yes, and it was a very clear and bold statement that was being made, which was to obey the voice of Yahweh. And that is to obey all that Yahweh has spoken, which is his word, as given through Moshe and the prophets and the writings, because all scripture is breathed by Elohim, and yes, this third yes declares obedience to this. Yehoshua then made a covenant with them that day and laid upon them a law and right ruling. And I find this very interesting in seeing how it was 3 times that the people made the confession of their willingness to serve Yahweh, while knowing and acknowledging the blessing of serving him, as well as the consequences of not serving him if they turned away to other mighty ones. And so what we can see with these 3 affirmative confessions to serve Yahweh, it gives us a clear picture of the 3 times a year that the males were required to go up to Jerusalem to keep the appointed times. Collectively, the 3 times would cover all the appointed feasts. Now, in a similar sense, we see that these 3 times that Israel confessed their service unto Yahweh, after which a covenant was made, that full and complete reverent service unto Yahweh is a non-negotiable condition for a covenanted people. The keeping of all his appointed times is critical to keeping our identity and our inheritance in him intact. So regarding this up-and-coming feast of Pesach and Matzot, we're clearly told twice in Shemot 13 that it is a sign on our hand and our forehead. It's a mark of our worship as a covenanted people who choose to serve the Lamb that was slain. It doesn't stop at this feast, as full obedience and service is required each and every day, as we fear him now, serving the Master in sincerity and truth. Just as Yeshua Messiah was inspected and examined and found to be without blemish and worthy to be the perfect Lamb for our sins, we too must use this time wisely to inspect and examine ourselves, allowing the light of the Word to bring to surface that which must be put away. As we make the good confession of our belief, being completely committed to making sure that we fear Yahweh, and serve him in perfection and truth. So that, as Hebrews says, let us therefore draw near with a true heart in completeness of belief, having our hearts sprinkled from a wicked conscience and our bodies washed with clean water, able to come before the Master and eat with joy the Pesach meal, that we may proclaim the one whom we fear and serve in sincerity and truth. Amen. So as we consider once again the significance of the 10th day of the first month, Land Selection Day, may you be reminded to take a good look in the mirror, so to speak. Ask yourself if you truly have chosen to serve the Master in perfection and truth. Or have you found that there might have been some leaven of hypocrisy lurking around in your life? This is a time to confirm your choice and take for yourselves the perfect lamb, making the right choice each and every day. Now, the Hebrew word that's translated as take in Shemot 12 that we started with, and take a lamb for yourselves, is lakach, which means to take, fetch, lay hold of, seize, snatch away. And the picture of taking the perfect lamb is a picture of taking up the necessary responsibility of walking in the clear instructions of our good shepherd, our Pesach, who was slaughtered for us. And a word that's derived from this root word lakach is the noun lekach, which means a learning, a teaching, an instruction, persuasion. It's translated as instruction in Deuteronomy 32, verse 1 to 2, where it says, "Give ear, O heavens, and let me speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my instruction fall as rain, my speech drop down as dew, as fine rain on the tender plants and as showers on the grass." And when we understand the clear terminology used here in this Song of Moshe, should be fresh in the minds of many of you who we just went through the Song of Moshe last week, we are able to connect this with other prophetic shadow pictures of the two comings of Yeshua Messiah that's being clearly spoken of here. The instructions of Yahweh coming down like rain. In other words, the teacher of righteousness will come down like rain in the season of the harvests. This is a powerful picture for us in recognize how it's the instructions of Yahweh that by his instructions that we are equipped and prepared for him to come and fetch us and take us as a bride. Now, the verb lakach is actually translated also as takes, and it's understood as in a sense of as being married, in the sense of a husband coming to take up his bride. In Devarim 24 verse 1, it says, "When a man takes a wife and shall marry her, then it shall be, if she finds no favor in his eyes, he has found a matter of uncovetousness in her, and he shall write a certificate of divorce and put it in her hand and send it out of his house." I read the whole verse, but I want to get that first part of the verse because it's clearly highlighting marital language, covenant language, when a man takes a wife. And this is what our Master is coming to do, to take up his bride, his ready bride. It's on the 10th of the first month that a perfect lamb was taken up by each house, and in doing this, the choice was being made as the necessary requirements to have the shed blood of the lamb cover them would be made secure. So, as we think of this 10th day of the first month that we are drawing near to before we get to Pesach and Matzot, may we be reminded that we are a bride that our Master has cleansed in his own blood, equipping us to take up his instructions for set-apart living and being ready to partake in his appointed times without the leaven of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Yehoshua gave the clear call to make the right choice. Now, the Hebrew word that's translated as choose in Yehoshua 24 verse 15 comes from the root word bachar, which means to choose, select, the choicest or preferred. It's used to express that choosing which has ultimate and eternal significance. And we see in Scripture that Yahweh chooses a people, certain tribes, specific individuals, a place for his name. And in all these cases, service and obedience is at the heart of this choosing. Thus, Yahweh chose Israel to be set apart and thereby to serve as witnesses among the nations. His choosing over us has eternal significance. His choice is forever. Now, the expected response of the chosen is loving obedience and complete commitment in uncompromised service to the one who's chosen us. Yochanan 15 verse 16, our Master made it clear, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit and that your fruit should remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he shall give you." And he makes it very clear here that we did not choose him, but he chose us. Our acceptance of his choosing implies that we understand and acknowledge our needed response, which is to obey. And in doing so, we relinquish and forfeit all choice for self, simply because we accept our choosing and realize that we are no longer our own, but rather we belong to him who's purchased us with his own blood. Hence we are called the chosen. And while this might seem and is fairly obvious at first glance, and it should be, what we do find is that many actually do not recognize the consequence of their acceptance of the great choosing of Elohim upon their lives. For they simply continue to make bad choices that render their garments defiled before the one who has chosen us and clothed us with his righteousness. The choice to serve who you want to is given to those who have not fully accepted the choosing of Elohim. For those who have fully accepted and responded to the clear choosing of Elohim are called to fear Elohim and serve him in perfection and truth. And in that acceptance, the responsibility is clear. Put away all falsehood, put away all idolatry that leads to death. What I really am trying to make clear here is that when we have understood the clear choosing of Elohim, there is actually no more choosing that we get to do when it comes to fearing and serving in perfection and truth, because we should have made that choice and remain in that choice. Kepha reminds us in Kepha Aleph 1 Peter 2 verse 9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for a possession, that you should proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And these are words that we need to be continually reminded of. For the one who made us and formed us has said so. The simple call is serve as a chosen people and be a faithful witness of his light. Devarim 6 verse 25, one of my favorite verses, it says, it is righteousness for us when we guard to do all this command before Yahweh your Elohim as he has commanded us. Tehillah 119 verse 142 says, your righteousness is righteousness forever, and your Torah is truth. Now, if righteousness is forever, which it is because it's written for us, we're told that, and if it is righteousness for us to guard his commands, which it is because here's the verse, command tells us that, and if the Torah is truth, which it is because it's written clearly for us, then we are to walk in his Torah forever. How can it be done away with? Sadly, many people have chosen to serve falsehood, for it seems evil in their eyes to actually serve Yahweh. Tehillah 25 verse 12 says, who then is the man that fears Yahweh? He teaches him in the way that he should choose. The one who truly fears Yahweh meditates on his Torah day and night and is taught in the way that he has chosen to walk in. The psalmist proclaims in Tehillah 119, first in verse 30, I have chosen the way of truth, your right rulings I have held level. And in verse 173, your hand is a help to me, for I have chosen your orders. So when we have firmly accepted his choosing of us, we're able to understand how his hand is our help, and by choosing him, we see how his right rulings keeps us level-headed and able to stand firm and not be tossed about by various corrupted teachings that are flying about. Matityahu 24 verse 4 or 22 verse 14 says, many are called, but few are chosen. The Greek word for chosen is eklektos. It means chosen, elect, favorite, picked out. And the Greek word for called is kletos, which means called, invited, as in invited to a banquet. Now, we're able to see how the wedding invitation has gone out to many people, yet as in the parable of the wedding banquet, Yeshua Messiah tells us how so many people are too busy with their own agendas, and they will be found not to be worthy. After a rejection of the call of the chosen, the command in this parable was then to go out and find whoever they could. The banquet hall was full, and when the sovereign came in, the one who was not properly dressed was thrown out. This is a parable. Doesn't mean they're getting in. It's a parable of you'll be thrown out where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Today there are many who simply refuse the invitation and acceptance of the choosing of Elohim, while there are some who hear the call, yet actually refuse to acknowledge the expected requirements of being dressed in righteousness. As they've hated instructions of Elohim, cast his words behind them, and as a result, they'll be cast out, all because they chose for themselves that serving Elohim is evil. The choice of the chosen is actually clearly made upon the acceptance of his choosing us. That being said, it's then very clear that our ability to choose how we are to serve is actually not optional. The only choice that we are given after our being chosen is to choose to serve one another. If fearing and serving Elohim is evil and dysfunctional in our eyes, and if that is that is the wrong choice to be making. By us being set apart, chosen, treasured possession of Elohim, who desire to love, obey, and cling to him and serve him with our all, we actually have no choice on deciding whether we want to do what is commanded or not. Our choice to obey was made on the day we accepted his choice and choosing of us. The choice of the chosen has been made. The question is, have you changed your mind? Have you found yourself in a situation where you have chosen to compromise? Have you found yourself reasoning away obedience by claiming a right to make your own choices? May this teaching that I'm presenting today be a reminder and an encouragement to be a faithful witness of the truth, as you guard to do all that our Master has commanded us and walk in righteousness as you walk in his Torah, meditating on it day and night, and walking as Yeshua Messiah did. He who hears, let him hear what the Spirit is saying through his word. When we look into the mirror of the word, a couple of questions we should ask ourselves is, are there any forms of idolatry in our lives that need to be destroyed? Are there some things that maybe you've fashioned with your own thoughts and choices, only to find that you've been chasing after that which is actually the feeding on ashes, so to speak? It's worthless, it's empty. Making the same mistake that Ephraim was doing, and Ephraim was called back to take words and render the bull of their lips, no longer go after the worthless matters. Then hear this urgent call to hear the one who formed you, and follow him, and serve as a chosen one should. Our Master's Pesach, Passover, and Matzot, unleavened bread, is drawing near, is drawing close. And as we consider the significance of the 10th day of the first month, hear this call of lamb selection to make the right choice by choosing life. May you be strengthened in the love and perfect choosing of our Master, the spotless Lamb, who shed his blood so that we may receive the necessary cleansing and ability to make the right choice in taking up his instructions and delighting ourselves in him. We've been given the gift of life, and his Torah is life. We're told in Devarim 32, verse 45 to 47, when Moshe ended speaking all these words to all Israel, he said to them, "Set your heart on all the words with which I warn you today, so that you command your children to guard to do all the words of this Torah. For it is not a worthless word for you, because it is your life. And by this word you prolong your days on the soil which you pass over the Yarden to possess." His Torah is not worthless, it's our life. And in recognize the clear need to hold firm this calling and choosing of Elohim, we're reminded that we must continue to make the right choice of serving him in sincerity and truth. I want to remind you of the words of Moshe that we find in Devarim, or Deuteronomy chapter 30 from verse 15 to 20. He says, "See, I have set before you today life and good, and death and evil, in that I am commanding you today to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways, and to guard his commands, and his laws, and his right rulings. And you shall live and increase, and Yahweh your Elohim shall bless you in the land which you go to possess. But if your heart turns away, and you do not obey, and shall be drawn away, and shall bow down to other mighty ones, and serve them, I have declared to you today that you shall certainly perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you are passing over the Yarden to enter and possess. I have called the heavens and the earth as witnesses today against you. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore you shall choose life, so that you live, both you and your seed, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to obey his voice and to cling to him. For he is your life and the length of your days, to dwell in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov, to give them." What is made abundantly clear is that the Torah is not a worthless word to us. It is our life, if we choose to submit and walk in it, that is. Our Master in Elohim, Yeshua Messiah, is the Word made flesh. He came to give us a clear pattern and witness of how we are to walk in the abundant life that he has given us through his sacrifice, and by submitting to his Torah, accepting his death, and receiving the newness of life by his Spirit, so that we walk as true set-apart and chosen ones, choosing life that has been set before us, by choosing to walk in and stay in our Master through complete obedience to his Torah. For in doing so, we choose him and we choose life. He is the way, the truth, and the life. I want to remind you, in Hebrew, the word for life is chai. It means life, alive, living, flowing, fresh, running. And what we recognize is that we must guard against looking to the letter of the Torah only, as we must recognize that the Torah without Messiah contains no life. But it is only in Messiah that true life of the Torah becomes something that can and does sustain us. Tehillah 36 verse 9 says, "For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light." Now, in the ancient pictographic script, Pi is pictured as follows. You have the letter Chet and Yot. The Chet is a picture of a tent wall. It has the idea or carries the idea or meaning of separation, because a tent wall would separate two halves of the tent, or reflect the outside walls that would bring protection from the outside and from those who are inside. And so therefore it highlights protection and security. But it also gives the idea of a cutting off of those who are outside. So this Chet can also carry the meaning of established, secure, cut off or separated from. And when we think of it as a tent wall or a tent boundary, we also recognize this picture of us being built up as living stones in the Master. The Yot is a picture of an arm and a hand. It carries the meaning of walk, make, throw. That's the primary function of a hand and arm, and it represents one's worship in giving thanks and extending the hands as a gesture of this. The working of one's hands is the basic meaning of this letter, what we do. And so in this pictographic lettering for life, Chai, we're able to see that it's by the work of Messiah, the outstretched arm and hand of Elohim, that we as living stones are being built up as a dwelling place of the living Elohim and have been separated to serve and worship him in spirit and truth. These two pictographs of the Chet and Yot representing life carries the understanding of separated to serve. And on this Lamb Selection Day, when we choose life, we're choosing the choice of being separated to serve. We're reminded of the need to be continually making that right choice, to serve in perfection and truth, to fear Yahweh, to guard his commands. Now, the Hebrew word for choose, bachar, that I mentioned earlier, is pictured as follows in the ancient pictographic text. You've got a beit, a chet, and a riesh. Now, we've looked at all these letters, the beit, the tent floor plan, the chet, the tent wall. The riesh is a picture of a head of a man, meaning top beginning. First, we know who our head is, Messiah. And so there, when looking at this root word for choose or choice, we're able to see the clear picture of separation. Our Master, who is our head, has separated us from the depravity of lawlessness in order to be his dwelling place, which is a house that's governed by his life-giving commands. And this pictograph of bachar, to choose or choice, is the house is separated and secured by the head. Our Master came to give us life. He came to call us out of darkness so that we can walk in newness of life as a set-apart house where he will come to dwell in the midst of. Our call to come out and be separate and touch not the unclean is a call that's given to a cleansed house, a people who have chosen life and not death. The members of the house obey the master of the house. The reality is there's no other choice that's worth making apart from the one to choose life. This is lamb selection, making the right choice by choosing life. I want to look at another passage in Scripture that makes mention of the 10th of the first month. And it's in Yechezkiel 40, chapter 40, verse 1 to 2. In the 25th year of our exile, Rosh Hashanah, at Rosh Hashanah, on the 10th of the first of the new moon, in the 40th year after the city was stricken, on that same day, the hand of Yahweh came upon me, and he brought me there. In visions of Elohim, he brought me into the land of Israel and set me on a very high mountain, and upon it, toward the south, was a structure of a city. We are told that in the head of the month of the year, which is Rosh Hashanah, on the 10th of the month, Yechezkiel was given visions of Israel and the temple in its perfect service. And these visions continue for a number of chapters. And as we go through the Torah each week, we know that it was on the first day of the first month, Rosh Hashanah, that Moshe was told to raise up the dwelling place, as in Shemot 40 verse 2, on the first day of the first new moon, you are to raise up the dwelling place of the tent of appointment. So with Moshe being told to set up the tabernacle on Rosh Hashanah, and Yechezkiel's visions coming on the 10th of the first month, we can see how Rosh Hashanah reminds us of the perfect dwelling place of Elohim, which we are, in Yeshua Messiah, being built up in complete set-apartness and cleansed from all defilement. These visions of the millennial temple and its service when Yechezkiel was brought to Jerusalem in visions on the 10th of the first month, we can see these visions fitting perfectly in with us, giving us the idea of making the right, clear choice of whose dwelling place we are and who it is that we serve. For in being raised up in our Master's redemption, having been cleansed through water, we are to serve in perfection of set apartness, obeying the rules of his house, which we now are. And in making the right choice as depicted through the lessons that we can see from the 10th of the first month, we have the assurance that the 10th of the 7th month, on Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement, our deliverance will be made complete. And that will be a clear day where we will see us being with the Lamb forever. We are also told that Jerusalem came up out of the Yarden on the 10th day of the first month. Yehoshua 4 says from verse 19, "And the people came up from the Yarden on the 10th day of the first new moon, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Yarden, Yehoshua set up in Gilgal. And he said to the children of Israel, saying, When your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, What are these stones? Then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel passed over this Yarden on dry land. For Yahweh your Elohim dried up the waters of the Yarden before you until you had passed over, as Yahweh your Elohim did to the Sea of Reeds, which he dried up before us until we had passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth shall know the hand of Yahweh, that it is strong, so that you shall fear Yahweh your Elohim forever." Now, when we look at these words of Yehoshua, 40 years earlier, Israel was selecting a lamb that would be slain and preparing to leave the land of their captivity. And then on this same day, Lamb Selection Day, they were entering into the Promised Land. On both of these accounts, it took obedient belief and complete trust in Yahweh. Those who do not believe do not enter in, because belief without works is dead. And on this day of the 10th of the first month, they set up 12 stones which they took out of the Yarden, and this would be a constant reminder that Yahweh brought them up out of this land of slavery, and that brought them into this land of promise, that he is to be feared forever, and all the earth shall know the hand of Yahweh. We are told in Devarim 27, verse 2 to 3, that they were to set up these stones. So I've just read to you what happened when Yehoshua did this, and the instruction came prior to this when it says, "And it shall be on the day when you pass over the Yarden to the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones and plaster them with plaster, and write on them all the words of this Torah, which when you have passed over, so that you go into the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as Yahweh Elohim of your fathers has spoken to you." Now I'm mentioning this passage in order to clearly highlight the obedience of guarding these instructions, where Yehoshua set up these stones in Gilgal on the 10th of the first month, as we've just read in Yehoshua chapter 4. So with Yehoshua setting up these stones, we take note that they certainly would have plastered them with plaster, written all the words of the Torah upon them, and we're told in Devarim 27 verse 8 that they were to write them on these stones plainly and well. These events shadow picture for us the clear witness of us being living stones that are being built up in the Master as living stones in Yeshua Messiah, his dwelling place, that we have his Torah written upon our hearts, and as we meditate on his Torah day and night, we certainly begin to see how plainly and well these words have been written for us in order to do them. The plastering with plaster or whitewashing with lime was so that the uncut stones could be written upon. And by the accounts that we have here, it is possible that this was done twice. First on the standing stones that were set up after crossing the Yarden, and secondly on the stones of the slaughter place on Mount Aval. The plaster is a picture of the flesh of the stone, and we recognize the picture of how the Torah is written on the fleshly tablets of our heart and no longer on stone, causing us to become letters of Messiah. Shaul writes to us in 2 Corinthians 3, where he says, "You are our letters, having been written in our hearts, known and read by all men, making it obvious that you are a letter of Messiah, served by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living Elohim, not on tablets of stone, but on the fleshly tablets of the heart." The picture here of plaster being plastered on the stone in order for the words to be written upon and seen as a witness of the kingdom rules to all is a picture of how we, who have the Torah upon our hearts, are to walk according to the kingdom rules, as outlined in the Torah, as a witness that is read before all, as they see by our active obedience to the Torah and see our good works of obedience, they see our identity as being letters and living stones of our Redeemer and King, the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world, the Passover Lamb, Yahushua Messiah. These stones would be a witness as a public testimony that the Israelites, who were entering into Canaan, possessed in the law their rule and their source of life. And so too today do we as living stones need to reflect the rule and the source of our life that has been purchased for us through obedience to the Torah, revealing the clear evidence of that which has been written upon our hearts as we truly become living letters of Messiah, the Lamb that we have said yes to in choosing life in Him and life abundantly. Now, writing all the words of this Torah on stones plainly and well is also another perfect picture of having the pure, unadulterated word written upon our hearts, without the dogmas and the traditions and the theologies of man that tend to complicate the truth rather than allow the truth to be presented as it is. His word is good, and it's very clear and distinctively plain to those who will listen and guard to do what's written in them. So as we consider the clear significance of the events that took place on this day, the 10th of the first month, we're able to recognize how important our choosing to walk in the life of our Master, Yeshua Messiah, the Lamb who takes away the sins of the world, is. And then we can be completely committed to serve Him in complete perfection and truth, getting rid of all the rubbish that hinders. It's part of the theme of recognizing the choice. We've got to get rid of the junk, throw off everything that entangles so we can run this race with endurance. And with the stones being set up in Gilgal on this day, we're reminded of who it is who circumcises our hearts and cleanses us from sin. Gilgal means a wheel or rolling, and this is the place where Yahushua circumcised Israel after entering the promised land, and Yahweh rolled away the reproach of Mitzrayim from Israel, and they were separated unto Yahweh. It is by the blood of Yeshua Messiah that we too have had the reproach of Mitzrayim rolled away in order that we may be separated unto Yahweh as a set-apart people that are being steadfast and committed to walking in the light of His Torah. Now that He has rolled away the reproach, we can commit our behavior to Yahweh, that is, commit our way and works to Him. We understand very clearly that our immersion in Yeshua Messiah is our circumcision that we receive, where the rolling away, where the dying to self and the renewal of life, the resurrection life is made available to us to walk and in fact run in the way of His commands. And when we consider all these passages that we've looked at in this teaching that I'm presenting in regards to the 10th day of the first month, we're able to identify a very clear pattern of being built up in the Master as living stones, offering up the spiritual slaughter offerings of thanksgiving and praise that is due to Him. So this picture of stones being built up, along with the visions of Yechezkiel that we're given in the service of the perfect service of the temple, we can also be reminded of the rebuilding of the walls that took place when the exiles of Yehuda returned from Babylon, as recorded in Nehemiah. We are told in chapter 4 that there was so much rubbish in Nehemiah 4 that they were unable to build a wall. And this was weakening the builders. And it just seemed too much to do, too overwhelming, especially with the enemy that was threatening the building process too. Now, I encourage you to go read Nehemiah 4. And what we learn from this passage is that a clear picture and lesson that rubbish heaps that are spoken of in Nehemiah 4 were as a result of the rubble of the broken down walls, and this became a stumbling block in the rebuilding process. And what we learn when we look at Nehemiah 4 and the challenges they were facing and the enemy's persecution that was coming, and they kept seeing all this rubbish and how are we supposed to build and we've got all this rubble, is that we need to make sure that there's no rubble of the past standing in the way of our building today. Because the rubble that was there was the walls that had been broken down, and after they'd gone into captivity and the enemy came and destroyed the temple and the walls of the temple, so they were rebuilding. There was problems here with all the rubble that was sitting around. And what we learn from this is past sins or lawlessnesses that have not been dealt with, or even past theologies or traditions and lies that have shaped us, can actually become a very large heap of rubble that can hinder the building process of our Master's kingdom in our lives if it is not dealt with and removed totally out of our lives. You cannot allow the rubble of past building blocks of lies and traditions that have been exposed, broken down, and stripped away to be in the way of rebuilding the walls of truth in our lives. And very often, theologies and dogmas of man and the holding on to inherited false teachings, etc., can actually be a form of rubble that is standing in the way of being built according to the clear instructions that are contained in the Torah. So as we consider this day on making right choices and looking into the mirror of the Word and thinking about being built up and living as living stones and allowing the work of our Master to be perfect in our lives, what rubbish heaps, if any, might there be standing in your way of building the kingdom by belief in your life, which, as a result of it being too inconvenient to clean up and get rid of, you kind of left it alone and let it heap up right before your eyes? You know, rubbish heaps eventually begin to stink and they breed sicknesses. We're to get rid of rubbish that hinders the building. Like any building site, as building progresses, the rubble or debris heaps up, and if it's not removed, it can become a serious problem that hinders progress. This is also a picture or figurative way of understanding what is worthless for us, or worthlessness, as we take note that rubbish or rubble is rubbish. I mean, self-explanatory. Rubble or rubbish is worthless. And I find this a very important picture lesson to learn for us all, is that we can recognize that the things that can, recognize the things that can cause us to want to quit need to be out of our lives. When there's a huge rubble heap of rubbish standing in your way, how can you carry on if it isn't removed? This can also metaphorically speak of having those so-called gray areas in your life where compromise has a way of setting in where it shouldn't have in the first place, because one often overlooks certain key areas of obedience and then begins to shadow them over with a twisted justification and false reasoning, causing a matter or subject to suddenly, in their eyes, become a gray area, and therefore it gets left undealt with. It's not removed, so it just lies there. And as we consider the events that took place when they returned from Babylon and they began rebuilding the walls, after they started rebuilding the walls, that's when they heard the Torah for the first time, when Ezra read, and we got all those events on Yom Teruah and, passage that highlights the joy of Yahweh as our strength. We can learn from these events and the effect and the tactics of the enemy that were trying to stop the building process is that rubbish in our lives hinders the building. Rubbish heaps will cause us to be unable to see the enemy who hides behind such rubble heaps. And heaps of rubble take up unnecessary space. They leave no room to build as one should. Rubbish heaps make building work harder, seem more strenuous. It causes one to think that too much is being asked of them, and in the process, the heaps of rubbish will grow and it will cause a loss of sight. And one with rubbish in their life can't focus on rebuilding. So that's a thought I also want to leave you with in considering the 10th day of the first month, because it can be a very sobering reminder to make sure we are making the right choice, not letting rubble and rubbish linger in our lives and hinder our ability to bring the proper praise as true living stones in the Master. This Lamb Selection Day ought to be a reminder to all of us who it is that we belong to, who it is who paid the price for us, to be built up as living stones in Him, so that we make the right choices and not allow the hindrance of rubbish to discourage and weaken our ability to be properly built up in love. So as you prepare for the upcoming feasts of Pesach and Matzot, may you be refreshed in the joy of serving the Master in perfection, sincerity and truth, and be a clear voice of a bride that declares along with His Spirit a bold call for others to come and make the right choice too. This is Lamb Selection, making the right choice by choosing life. I pray that this teaching, maybe a bit lengthy for some, will be an encouragement to you to consider the joy of understanding the choices that we've been given by the choice of our Master over our lives. And the only choice really is to choose his choice over us and to choose life, so that we can walk in his truth that sets us apart and be equipped to get rid of any rubble or hindrance that is in our way, so that we can run this race with great joy, with great gladness of heart, and that with great expectation we will endure to the end. Amen. I pray this lesson will be encouraging, upbuilding, equipping for you as you prepare for these feasts. And so I want to close in prayer. And we encourage you to share this message with others. We are seeking Yahweh to grow us, grow our reach, grow our ability. So I also encourage you to pass this on to others. And for those who have not connected with us that are hearing this, please send us an email, go to our website, go to our YouTube channel, join us a live stream on Twitch channel on a Shabbat. And if you'd like to know more about us, please, we encourage you to make connection with us. And if your heart is moved to support our ministry through tithes and offerings, I encourage you to do that too. You can find out how to do that on our site or contact us directly for more information. Beloved family, thank you for taking the time to hear these words, this teaching, which I feel is very important for the bride at this time as we prepare for the up-and-coming feasts. So as we draw nearer and nearer to these wonderful feasts of this first month, may Yahweh continue to bless you, and we're going to close in prayer. Master Yahweh, we thank you that you've given us life and life abundantly, and today we confirm the choice that we've made to serve you because you chose us. And I thank you that your choice over us gives us confidence and the assurance that we can walk as you walked. We can guard ourselves against the hindrances and the rubbish heaps of this world of sin and lawlessness. And we can make our lives a living offering before your face, a pleasing offering, a set-apart offering, as we bring to you continual praise with our hands lifted up in set-apartness before you. And I pray for every home that is preparing for the up-and-coming feasts, that they will be done with great joy and great diligence, great reverence before your face, so that we truly can celebrate this time of remembrance and acceptance and choice with great gladness of heart. We bless, praise, and exalt you in the name of Yahushua, our Messiah. And I just pray your blessing, your name, over everyone who is hearing these words, and that by your Spirit, these words will be made clear. Yahweh bless you and guard you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you and show favor to you. Yahweh lift up his face upon you and give you shalom. Shalom, shalom, family. Yahweh bless.